Hello, everyone. Welcome. Great to have you joining us today for our March 2022 Market Links session. As you're joining, we just want to orient you to a few things. We are meeting today using Zoom webinar rather than Zoom meeting. So we will have chat disabled for all attendees, but you will be able to chat with us, hosts and panelists. So do feel free to use the chat function to let us know if you have any questions, comments, or needs throughout our session together. We'll also be using the Q&A function to manage our questions today. Feel free to click on that Q&A box and offer any questions there. There's also an upvote feature. We do invite you to upvote questions that resonate with you. We will have a Q&A portion of our session later, and we'll do our best to address all of the questions that you put in there. And we'll get started in just a minute. Also want to alert you that we will have closed captioning available. You can click on the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or we'll put a link to a separate window in chat where you can follow along with the closed captions. We also have a poll available. We invite you to let us know your current level of knowledge about the care economy. So you can indicate low, medium, high on that poll. We'll get started in just a moment. Thanks for your patience. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're very pleased to have you joining us today for our March Market Link session on improving the global care economy to accelerate gender equality and economic growth. We just want to orient you to a few things in this Zoom meeting today. We are actually using Zoom webinar and not Zoom meeting, so a few things might look different. We have our general chat disabled for attendees, but you are able to chat as hosts and panelists, so do please reach out to us via chat if we can support you at all throughout today's session. Feel free also to enter questions or comments there as we go along. We also have the Q&A function, so please enter your questions in that Q&A box, and we'll do our best to address them during the Q&A portion later in today's session. You can also upvote questions there if you find questions that resonate with you. We also have closed captioning available. Click on the CC button in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you can click on the link we've posted into chat to view that in a separate window. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and hand it over to Julie Neal to get us started today. Over to you, Julie.
Thanks so much, Laura. All right, well, welcome to this month's Market Links webinar. I'm actually going to hand it right over to Jamila to kick us off and get started. Over to you, Jamila.
Great, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for joining the webinar. My name is Jamila Biggio. I am the agency's Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, I sit in the Office of the Administrator and lead USAID's work on gender equality policy and programming, our strategic vision, and serve as the agency's primary representative on these issues. We are thrilled to have you join us for this discussion today. We've organized this event to give participants the opportunity to learn more about the care economy, how USAID is defining and framing it, and why we consider investing in the care economy an economic, education, health priority that contributes to lasting development gains. This is a message underscored by the president. In October, the White House launched the US government's first ever national strategy on gender equity and equality, which outlines our whole of government priorities to unlock the potential of all people, including women and girls, recognizing their intersecting identities. It identifies as a priority investing in care infrastructure and care workers to help rebuild the economy and lower costs for working families. It does so recognizing that almost every family in the world will need care services for someone in their household at some point in their lives, whether that is elder care, child care, helping someone who is sick or disabled, or helping with household chores. The International Development Research Center, who we will hear from shortly, defines the care economy as the paid and unpaid labor and services that support caregiving in all its forms. Women are responsible for nearly 3/4 of unpaid care work on average, which undermines their ability to participate in paid work. They also make up the vast majority of the care workforce. We see that responsibility for paid and unpaid care work creates barriers and fuels discrimination that hold women back in the workforce. COVID-19 brought into sharp relief how profoundly a dearth of care options affects women. A recent McKinsey report noted that during the pandemic, women dropped out of the workforce at a faster pace than men, experienced higher job loss, and increased levels of burnout, exhaustion, and stress. Around the world, families also turned to adolescent girls to help care for younger siblings when they lacked other care options. And this in turn has affected the ability of adolescent girls to attend school. Research indicates that when women have access, when working families have access to quality care services, women are able to seize economic opportunities available to them. They can pursue jobs outside the home. They can work longer hours if they so wish. They miss fewer work days. And we also see that adolescent girls are more likely to stay in school, which improves their health and economic opportunities over the course of their lifetime. We know why expanding access to care services is good for working families. We also know that the care economy is central to global economic growth and increased company performance. It is estimated that in the United States alone, the care economy is a $648 billion market. Meeting the demand of future care needs could create almost 300 million jobs by 2035, according to a new International Labor Organization report. It also enhances development outcomes. It promotes gender equality and women's empowerment. It promotes early childhood development. It promotes primary, secondary, and tertiary education. It promotes healthcare, and it promotes, as we said, economic growth. This research and this moment as we address the care economy with a new level of commitment coming out of and building back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. This is truly a call of action to the global development community to scale up our work and to close the gaps in the care infrastructure and ensure that we are providing working families around the world with the access to care services that they need, with the protections in the care market for care workers that they need, and to truly invest in this as the economic, health, education, development priority that it is. I will turn now to my colleague, Deputy Assistant Administrator Bama Thria, to open up and move us forward in the discussion. Thank you again for being with us.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamila, and thank you so much to everyone who's participating today. I'll be brief. I think we have some really wonderful experts with us, and we want to take advantage of their time today. I'll just spend a minute or two building on Jamila's comments to say that we at USAID, we are increasingly realizing, as I think many of our development partners are realizing, that we're seeing some profound shifts in the world of work. And the COVID-19 pandemic has just accelerated those shifts. For example, I think for many years, we saw manufacturing-led development as a good traditional model for creating jobs and prosperity. But we now know it's the services sector that is growing more rapidly than any other. It's also the services sector that's accounting for a very large share of workforces that are already feminized, industries such as health and social care, where women account for 70% of the global workforce. And these are the sectors that we are likely to see continue to grow in future. And that's another reason why we need to invest in these sectors. The financial value of women's contribution to these sectors is enormous. And yet, these are jobs that routinely suffer from equity pay gaps. So imagine the spillover effect of ensuring gender equity in these care sectors. And that's just the formal service sector. In the informal sector that predominates in so many of the economies where we work, a range of household services exist in parallel with formal services to provide an enormous underpaid contribution to economies. For example, there are an estimated 75 million domestic workers worldwide providing care for people's children in homes. The vast majority of these are female. Finally, I'll just give one other point before turning to our speakers, and that is we believe that care jobs are an important part of a just transition to a green economy. Navigating a gender equitable shift to clean technologies and clean sectors will require continued support to fields such as healthcare and education, which are critical to reaching a net zero future. So we believe investing in decent work creates meaningful new opportunities for those that will need to transition from older industries, sunsetting industries, into the jobs of the future. In today's roundtable, we're going to talk about what it takes to achieve the practices and social norms in the care economy to positively impact economic growth, gender equality, and women's economic empowerment. I'm so looking forward to moderating that discussion. But first, I'm pleased to welcome Erin Tansey from the International Development Research Center, or IDRC, who will provide an overview and framework for our discussion of the care economy. Over to you, Erin.
Thank you so much, Bama. And you can hear me and see me, I hope. So yes, I am Erin Tansey. I am the director of the Sustainable Inclusive Economies team at the International Development Research Center based in Ottawa, Canada. And I thought I would just give you a quick overview of who we are for those of you who have not come across or worked with IDRC before. So we are part of the of Canada's foreign affairs efforts and development efforts. And our strategy is to engage and support research in the Global South for the Global South. And we do that to address critical knowledge gaps and innovation gaps towards more sustainable and inclusive world. And of course, gender equality and inclusion and the care economy are central to IDRC's mandate and our work. And we believe it's not only urgent to act to transform the care economy, but it's also imperative to do so with local actors and being in the driver's seat with locally generated knowledge. And so that is essentially what IDRC does. We provide support through grants and other forms to support researchers in the Global South to come up with to have the evidence and the data that they need to make the case for policy change and for finding out what works. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be quite quick. We could talk for the whole hour on some of the work that we've been involved with, but I will give you a quick overview of the care economy and of the 5 R's, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with, and then just giving it some context with where and how that situates within the work that we do, the research that we do at IDRC, and then we can explore the gaps and the opportunities, which I think will be part of the panel discussion going forward. So next slide, please. So as Jamil and Bama said, the definition that we use is that the care economy can be both paid and unpaid, and it includes direct care of children, the sick, the elderly, and persons with disabilities, but it also includes indirect care, like cooking, cleaning, washing, and other things, collecting fuel and water, and supervisory care and other tasks. So just to make that clear, because I think there may be other definitions out there, but that's what we have been using. And we have had a longstanding program called the Growth and Economic Opportunities for Women Initiative. That's been going since about 2012. And we've been working with the Gates Foundation and the Hewlett Foundation. And that was really focused on women's economic empowerment. And getting the evidence, getting the research, finding out what are the biggest barriers to women's ability to participate fully in their economies, just like their male counterparts. And not surprisingly, we found that gender inequalities were reducing only slowly, that economic growth wasn't creating sufficient opportunities for women, that women devote significantly more time to unpaid care work than men, et cetera, and that the private sector can also be mobilized to work with governments and civil society organizations in the public-private sphere to deliver quality and affordable healthcare. Next slide, please. So I won't go into too much of the detail because it is a 10-year or so program, and there's lots of details. But generally speaking, gender equality needs to go beyond women, getting women into the paid labor force, that the drudgery of women's paid and unpaid care work has detrimental impacts on their physical and psychological well-being, and that women have this double burden, which has a negative effect not only on themselves, but of course on the children and the others that they are responsible for caring for. This GROW program started off sort of a global program where we had many countries, and including Nepal, Kenya, India, Rwanda, etc. And then from about 5 years ago or so, we focused it more specifically on Africa, on East Africa and West Africa. And we look at how women balance unpaid care work in the households and their income and earning activities, and what helps women to achieve balance between these, income generation and caring, and can the provision of daycare unlock the full potential of women at work? And so some of the key findings is that we have found that women, by investing a little bit in this care economy and giving women a choice to provide, to give them access to relatively affordable care for their children, in particular, in this case, it led to a 17% rise in women's participation in their economies, in the workforce, in just a very short period of time, like less than 1 year. So we found that to be extremely encouraging. Next slide, please. So, and while we have spent a lot of time on the childcare aspect of the care economy, obviously that is just one domain, and there are others, as the definition says. But what we found is that in our evidence is that so for instance, in Kenya and India, we tested whether providing affordable childcare can enable women to participate in paid employment, and whether it's a cost-effective mechanism to help women balance paid and unpaid care. And we found that it does, as I mentioned. In Kenya, mothers who received a daycare voucher for their children, as I said, were 17% more likely to be in paid employment than those that were not. And that also in Kenya, mothers who received daycare vouchers worked on average 5 hours less per week without affecting their total earnings. So this suggests that subsidizing childcare for working mothers may allow them to work less without significantly reducing their earnings, thus simultaneously enhancing productivity and giving women more time for themselves. And I think this is one of the areas where, it's only just in the last few years that we've started to really be able to talk about the importance of women's psychological health. And it's not just about taking away some of their burdens, but giving them the chance to not only to do less of the care work, but to take that remaining time that they've saved to invest in themselves. That can be just literally resting, but it could also be, learning a new skill. It could be, many things. If you think about your own life, what do you do when you've got a little bit of free time? And I think that's just a really encouraging part of the dialogue that's happening now on the global stage. Next slide, please. So this is just a graph that we took from one of our projects, and you'll see that it looks at the five R's, which are recognize the value of care, reduce the drudgery and the time spent on unpaid care, redistribute the responsibility and the cost equitability within households and outside the households, represent, give agency and voice to care workers, and then to reward. Look at the difference in the pay gap, like Bama was mentioning. The only reason why the fifth one isn't circled is because it's just an old, anyways, they should all be circled. Let me just put it that way. And although we at IDRC focus on 4 of the R's, which are to reduce, redistribute, recognize, and reward across different streams of research in different regions. So in the next slide, I'm going to highlight how these domains are integrated into our work. So next slide, please. So we have a global research initiative that we support together with the Soros Economic Development Fund. It aims to transform the care economy through identifying, documenting, and amplifying market-based solutions to those 4 R's: to recognize domestic and care work, to reduce time dedicated to this work, to reward the services, and to redistribute unpaid domestic and care activities to men in the home or to someone else outside of the home. And the ultimate aim is to stimulate growth and investment in market-based solutions to care economy challenges in Southeast Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and in Latin America. And it's only just beginning. I think they sort of kicked off last November, but already they have come up with a mapping of the various companies and organizations that are working in this space. There are over 300 already that have been mapped out. And next slide, please. And so just to say that addressing the care economy is a huge need and challenge and a huge opportunity globally. And that's what's so exciting. I just wanted to share a little bit of data that there are 16.5 million domestic and care workers in Latin America in particular. 71.3% of these still work in the informal sector, meaning no contract or no social security. And I'm probably being told that I need to hurry up. Anyway, you can see this slide that there's still a lot of work to do. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of information on this slide. I won't go into the details, but we do have some ideas of proven and promising solutions and on many of these R's, and recognizing and reducing. And I've got another slide too that goes into some of the other R's, but I think I'll just leave it there for now because we can get into some of that in the discussion. And finally, moving forward, we need to, as a community, foster innovations, look at scaling impact for these solutions, and drive policies to promote and continue to promote gender equality in the world of work. So thanks very much.
Erin, thank you so much. Such a rich presentation. I will encourage everyone on this webinar to go to IDRC's website and look at their excellent resources. I know I'm a fan of the work that you and your colleagues have done and the number of resources you have built out and developed for all the rest of us over the years. So please, if you have any questions for Erin, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, not the chat, but the Q&A box. And we will come back to those at the end. I would like to now turn to our wonderful panelists and quickly introduce them. And then we're going to get into the first round of questions. So Frances Beaton Day is a childcare specialist at the World Bank. Gary Barker is the CEO of Promundo US. And Marina Durano is a specialist with Uni Global Union. All of their bios are on the invitation to this event, so we do encourage you to look at their bios for more information about them. But without further ado, I'd really love to jump into the questions. And Fran, we're going to start with you. And noting that you have authored a report, which I also recommend everyone to check out because it's just so compelling, Better Jobs and Brighter Futures, about the incredible payback of investing in childcare, and recognizing that childcare is just one aspect of the care economy. You all have really gone deep there and have launched an initiative to assist and facilitate greater investments in the childcare sector worldwide. Can you tell us a little bit about the World Bank's new initiative and what approach you're taking, what you're already learning?
Yeah, and thanks so much for having us here today. And as you mentioned, so for the last few years, the Early Learning Partnership team within the World Bank, together with other colleagues from across the World Bank, we've been looking at childcare really from a holistic perspective. So focusing on how expanding access to quality childcare has the potential to improve various different outcomes, including for women's economic empowerment, for child development, for family welfare, including well-being, as well as for business productivity and overall economic growth. So that was kind of the framing that we brought to it. And we introduced a paper last year, which lays out the evidence around investing in childcare from those different holistic perspectives. It also estimates the global need and suggests a number of policy goals for governments to ensure access to quality, affordable childcare for all families that need it. What we're now doing is launching a cross-sectoral work program on childcare, which really aims to expand the size and the quality of investments the World Bank is making across their projects. So at the country level, there are a number of different activities which are focusing on making the case for childcare, which is a really important first step, and supporting countries to design and implement quality projects that can both maximize the benefits for women and for children, by providing the kind of technical assistance and tools that teams need to do this effectively, as well as trying to build capacity within countries for longer term sustainability and development of knowledge. Countries will have access to two different types of grants. So there'll be small catalytic grants to help make the case for childcare, for example, situation assessments, as well as building parts of the enabling environment and piloting different approaches. So we held a kind of pilot funding round, if you like, a couple of years ago. And these were the kind of activities that teams did. And for example, in Côte d'Ivoire, they used this funding to conduct supply and demand situation assessments, which then made the case for childcare and allowed childcare activities to be incorporated into a couple of different projects with several $1 million being allocated to it. And other country grants were used to pilot approaches such as mobile creches and community-based childcare. And then the other part of funding we'll have is for larger grants, which are basically for match funding, for financing that's being allocated to childcare activities within projects, and that'll be match funding on a one-to-one basis. And this is really important to kind of further incentivize governments and kind of ensure a meaningful level of finance is allocated to childcare to help push towards scale. And then there's various pieces of global analytical work, which we hope will support country teams as well as serve as global public goods, but it includes kind of generating cross-country data, impact evaluations, and packages of tools and guidance. So let me pause there. I'm happy to answer any questions later.
Terrific, thank you. That is a wonderful overview. There will be lots of questions, I'm sure, but I do want to turn to Gary and bring him into the conversation. And Gary, I think what we've just heard from Fran is really, there's a wealth of evidence being generated as to what works. And of course, that's important to public policy makers to know that an investment is going to have payback. But there's also such an important normative piece, right? As we're dealing with centuries of historical social patterns that put this unpaid care burden on women, and your work to engage men and boys and to change those norms is really compelling. Can you tell us a little bit about the theory of change and how the work is going?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Bama. I think we have learned over our 20 years as Promundo that program approaches can work. We can get men and boys to change, whether that's reducing gender-based violence or father training programming, that we can get men to do more of the hands-on care work. And we've done randomized control trials on this in several countries. The issue is, how do we go to scale? Obviously, the issues that have been highlighted before, both by Aaron and Francis as well, they're structural. And so, we absolutely believe that the change with men and boys requires those structural changes. And particularly as we look at the care economy, what do we need to do to change it? And maybe the strongest evidence we have of a structural change that is, facing us at the moment is what happened with COVID. Women increased their time by more than 4 hours a week. This on top of the already 3.3 times they were doing compared to men, and men increased their time use in about 45 countries where UN Women did the research, and we did together with Oxfam in a few countries as well. Men also increased their time by an average of 3 hours a week. So there clearly is something that shifted. Men can be shifted to do this if we find ways to obligate, nudge, push. It's more than just our program approaches, but really do the structural changes. So what do we think those are? I mean, clearly, parental leave policies are among those. That's one of the areas where if you're in formal workplace setting, they can work. Now we have to look at where are we in terms of parental leave policies. About 115 countries offer paid maternity leave. Average days for those are 98. The US, of course, we know places among the last because we have no federally guaranteed leave still. About half the number of countries, 71, offer paid leave for fathers, and the average number of days is 5. So if we look at kind of our big policy approach, we really don't seem to believe that men's time matters, or that men will use it, or that men will actually do the hands-on caregiving. We have never advocated for reducing the number of days for mothers. We think we should top up the number of days for men, and not do the primary, secondary caregiver thing, that all caregivers of all genders should have access to that. And then we need the incentives to go with it. Social protection policies, another place that World Bank, GAC, USAID have invested lots and lots of years of work. We did a review of about 150 of those. Cash transfer programs specifically, the vast majority, for lots of reasons, focus on mothers. We found 4 of those 150 that did anything to nudge men or even mention that men should do more care work. So again, our biggest poverty alleviation strategies, we haven't even looked at how do we tinker with those without reducing anything that we're providing for women to nudge and push men to do more of the hands-on care work. The health sector has been a place where we also think there's the possibility for some structural changes. How can we take advantage of the fact that men do often accompany a partner for a prenatal visit? How to use that as a port of entry. We've done some work with Brazil's health sector and also in Rwanda on ways to do that it's women's decision whether he's present. And obviously to screen for violence, we can't just say it's an unmitigated good if you invite men in the door, but it is to say there are thoughtful ways that we can engage men and see impact there. Third, I'd say workplace policies. We need obviously the parental leave, but other kinds of flex time support. We've supported a couple of corporations that have made parental leave obligatory and that have made an assumption. They've shifted from an assumption of you're going to work full-time and you have to ask for part-time to looking at what kind of part-time arrangements can work. That's more of a global North solution than it is a global South one. But I think gives some ideas of what we might do in the workplace. Starting young, I would say, is another key one. How do we build this into how we raise our sons? Much of the inequality, and Jamil mentioned this before, starts quite young. And we saw that even exacerbate during COVID, where girls are expected to do more. So how can, whether through schooling, through social norm change campaigns at the community level, through media, another approach that we're looking at, can we change this notion that care work starts early with girls and boys do often other stuff outside the home for the household, but that we change those gender norms. And then finally, I am often on panels like this where I'm one man talking about this work. I really do think this is not to argue that, that we need more men to take up more panels. That is not the argument, but I do want to see more men as political allies in this space. Women have carried the burden of the care work, and it's been fabulous women activists and particularly feminist economists who have carried this topic I want to see more men stake, whether they're senior leaders at corporations or ministers of different agencies in their countries or parliamentarians, stake their political careers and time on the care economy. And I'd like to see us kind of enjoin more men to say, we will look at whether we vote for you by whether you take seriously the care economy. So let me stop there. Thanks.
That's fabulous. That is so much in just a few minutes for us to come back to. So I know we've already started to get a number of really interesting questions in. Let's bring Marina into the conversation, and then we'll see how much we can get going before we turn to the audience. Marina, you're representing or working with a major global union federation, and the federation has worked with care sector workers in a number of countries, from Nepal to Colombia to Poland. Can you tell us, how do we work with this workforce? What are some of the experiences that you and UNI have had in bringing the workforce's perspective into shifting our investments in the care economy?
Thank you, Bama. This is really great discussion. And before I respond to that, I just want to acknowledge our comrades in the International Domestic Workers Federation who are here with us today, Adriana Paz Ramirez and Fish Ip. I hope we give them some time during the Q&A to also share their own perspectives. But definitely, just going back to the slides that Erin had shared, reward and represent, very important and integral to recognition, to redistribution in the 5 R's framework. So that's what we do. The practical value of unions is very well known, but we need to just repeat that again and again, and about the bread and butter needs, because even as we think that, oh, the formal sector, they have all the benefits, and that's not the experience of the care workers that we have been organizing. Most of them are actually part-time workers and looking for more hours to work. They have definitely low pay. There's no question about that. It's below standard in any comparative sector. Almost 20% lower pay for the same jobs. And they also have questions of like, what are their upskilling and career pathways? It seems to be like a short-lived ladder. And then what happens is they migrate to other countries to fill in the unmet needs for care. And that's what we're seeing right now, even in the context of Europe, where Polish workers are moving into Western Europe, and the Ukrainians are filling up the Polish vacancies. And then the Ukrainians before the war, the spaces were filled up by Asians. So this is what's happening in terms of like the clear migration relationship. And so the unions want to make sure that any new entrant actually has the strength, the power to organize and fight for their better wages, living wages, better pay, benefits, access to social protection that if they are foreigners may not have access to. So there's a lot of racialization as well as migrant situations that are actually characteristic of the care sector as a whole. So when we talk about comprehensive care systems, we have to be inclusive in that larger sense, especially in the global format. So that's important. That's key to us to be effective. And then a second thing I want to share is that we're actually looking to expand our organizing to in Asia to community health workers who are often seen as, oh, those are the accredited activists, those are the volunteers and so on, but yet they have direct impact in terms of the public well-being of households because they visit households, not quite domestic workers, but still providing a key service. And then we're also looking to expand in MENA. We just had an occupational health and safety training in Tunisia last week. And that's a key point, occupational health and safety. The pandemic has shifted our attention towards those issues of workplace safety. Because they were the last, the care workers were the last to get PPEs, vaccinations. They actually had to demand for it before they got it. And our workers in Peru found themselves in jail just for asking for PPEs. So there's a lot of interaction between what happens in the care sector. It tells us a lot about what's going on in the broader society. But the other thing that we do, not just the usual bread and butter, but we also talk in terms of social dialogue, expand the spaces for social dialogue. We have an ongoing investor initiative right now, mostly with private equity investors, where we now are in conversations showing to the private equity investors that there are operational risks when that have direct impact on the well-being of their patients and their workers when you actually play down or do not fulfill labor rights. And we have 100 investors with about 3.7 trillion assets under management who are in who have signed on to our statement, and we are now forming a committee where we are exchanging views and helping them implement a better working conditions so that they can actually run, healthier facilities, basically. And that's a relatively new area of work. We want to expand into that as well. And the investors themselves are calling us, please help us. How do we do this? What are the standards? What are indicators that we can use? So that's really a new area of work. And I just want to flag also that IDWF has a campaign, Your Home is My Workplace. So that's also let's say, employer-employee conversation about how we can make that workplace a safe workplace, a healthy workplace for domestic workers. I'll leave it to Adriana and Fish to expound on that. So those are two things on the reward and represent that I would like to highlight as what we have been doing and hope to do more in the future.
Fantastic. So interesting. And I'm sure our audience will want more detail on the initiatives that you're describing. And what I want to do, because I know an hour goes by so quickly, and I want to give all of you a chance to pick up and respond to anything you've heard so far. I'd also like to invite Erin to turn her camera back on as we move into Q&A so that I can invite her to respond to questions as well. And I want to try to do something which is almost impossible since you've covered so much ground, and that is to just put a little bit of a frame around what we've discussed so far. I think, Marina, if I can come up with a top line on what you've just said, it's the importance of really investing in taking care of care workers themselves. Linking then back to Gary's description of it's not just, so we've got this lens that's on the people who are providing the care, expanding the notion of who provides care, making that more gender equitable, doing that both through normative change and policies, and then coming back to Fran's earlier comments about, what do we do to galvanize those shifts? What is the evidence we need to galvanize the public policy investments that make those shifts? So let me pause for a second and ask any of you if you want to respond to what you've heard from each other for a minute or two before we pick up on the number of audience questions that we have.
Well, I'll just go if I could. Thank you. I just wanted to, I'm just so happy to hear Gary speak. Like you, Bama, I think like probably all of us on the panel, we speak a lot about these issues to a variety of different audiences often, but it's, I don't remember the last time I was able to have that male perspective. And so it's just fantastic, and thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and I hope we can incorporate a lot of what you've said into the work that we do and the research that we do. So thank you.
Great. Anyone else want to respond or comment before we get into the audience questions?
Maybe I'll ask a question of Marina. When I did not comment about the issue of trying to engage men in the paid care economy. What we've read about or been part of in a couple of countries, it's been, perhaps even slower change than trying to get men to do more of the hands-on care at home. There's been, and I've also perceived, and we've tried to look at finding more initiatives, and there's really quite few. Of finding men, whether as daycare workers, elder care workers. Some work maybe in the healthcare system of trying to engage men as nurses and other health assistants. Has been a little bit there, but it also feels like a space that, kind of with not many success stories. And so wondering from your perspective, any thoughts on that? And I think there's also the challenge of how to do that in a way that doesn't feel like we're pushing men to be in a space where women have often had some of the only employment available to them. So yeah, just kind of how you've navigated that, or any thoughts you have on that.
Sure. Do you want me to respond now,
Please
Bama?
do.
Yeah. The one thing we need to actually understand is when a labor market or any sector of labor market is feminized, part of that is not just about the number of women, but also the quality of jobs. There's so the thing is that there's this parallel how is it understanding that if that's a female job, that's probably a lower paying job. So it's hard then when you have a society that is so geared towards the male as the breadwinner, that breadwinner will seek a feminized job. You know, so on the one hand, there is that normative thing that's going on inside the labor market. The second thing is actually I would focus in on paternity leaves and how men use paternity leaves and whether they actually do perform that work. And I think that's where your Promundo actually can come in and really how do you say, you know, spark a change in the way we men use our paternity leaves so that we can argue for equality in number. You know, you can have equality in number, but then if the guys only perform the kind of care work that is fun, right, playing with the child, etc., and the not so fun work is left still with the female partner or whoever plays the female role, then we still have those unequal issues, right? It's substantive inequalities remain present. So I would start with the paternity leaves really and get us to figure out what kind of programs we need to maximize those paternity leaves where they are present, so that when we go to countries advocating for paternity leaves or parental leaves, as it were, then we would have also more evidence of why this is good for male well-being, which is where you actually are really good at demonstrating, you know, how men's engagement in care improves their own well-being. And I think that's a message that still needs to be, you know, spread out more widely.
Thanks. Really important and interesting exchange. We've got so many questions. I know we're not going to get through them all. I'm going to throw a couple of questions at once into the mix here. One is more directed at Erin, I think, and one is directed at Fran, but I will welcome anyone else to respond as well. The question that came out of Erin, your presentation is you had, you know, in the end, and I know very quickly talked about using the private sector, you know, to invest in market-based solutions, and the question was about what evidence may exist about the relative effectiveness of the market-based solutions versus public investment, and you know, sort of what we know about what the right mix is there. And that sort of links to the question for Fran, although not entirely, but it's a very interesting question anyway, so I'll throw it in and the rest of you may want to respond. I mean, we know that care workers in the formal sector, in essential services, are often themselves lacking care options. And so how are you contemplating, you know, squaring that in the investments that that the new initiative will make? And I hope I've gotten that question right. So let me stop there and give you a chance to respond.
Thanks, Bama. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that I can't say that we have the exact answer to right now. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we're looking into, and we'll be looking into over the next 24 months, really trying to get into, you know, what is the balance? Where does it make sense to have private sector organizations or centers or take over, and where does it make more sense to have a public-private kind of scenario, or a fully funded government supported care system? It depends which country you're talking about. I think there was another question about, well, what's the reason why there's no care provided in many of these countries? Well, because, you know, there's a lot of times there's been no fiscal space for that, and it has not been a priority for government spending. And I think it's you know, with the COVID pandemic and everyone now realizing just how much care workers do, both paid and unpaid, this is really starting to get the attention that it needs. And I'll finally just add, I should have said this earlier, but you know, one of the most amazing examples of caring for the carers is in Bogota, in Colombia, where they've got a whole program excuse me, I encourage you to just Google it and see. It's just, I listened to a presentation about it last week. It's absolutely amazing. And they do work with men as well, but it's really about caring for those that provide care. And they have 7 centers throughout the city, and they're expecting to expand, and it's coming from state funds. So another piece of encouragement. Thanks.
I'd like to add a little something about that. You know, the public-private divide is actually not a clear line because there's subsidies, there are user fees, even the ownership of facilities can be, there's PPPs, you know, public-private partnerships as far as care infrastructure is concerned. You know, so that division is actually not quite easy to, I mean, if you're looking for causality, it's going to be very hard to establish that. But there is very new piece of working paper from NBER, the National Bureau for Economic Research, that looked specifically onto the behavior of private equity ownership of healthcare facilities in the United States, covering like a 7-year period, maybe something like that. And that was very compelling evidence where they said, if you go to a private equity owned facility, mortality rates are higher, short-term mortality within 90 days of staying. You know, you die sooner. and then there's the, I know it's kind of sad, a little scary, but go to the paper because, you know, that's the best way to do it. More higher use of drugs, you know, lower mobility, you know, so I mean, those are the 2 things I remember. There's the 3rd one. So for them, it's very clear. It's private equity, right? Not all forms of private ownership, because you have nonprofits in the private sector. So let's you know, let's not forget that. But if we can be a little bit more specific about the behavior or a certain section of the investor world, then we can do some of those causality. But that's the first one that's really been a really good. Most of them are most of the rest are case studies. That this is an econometric study, very interesting. I would point you to that as a source, and maybe something we can do some follow up on that.
Great, thanks, Marina. Let's Fran, I would love to bring you back in because I see a number of questions that I think, and I'll resist throwing in my own question if you want to just respond to some of what's out there so far.
Great. Let me pick up on the question around domestic workers and those working in the informal sector, because for us this is really key. And I think the most important thing across our work program is to focus on ensuring childcare is available for the most vulnerable families. And that means establishing access to affordable childcare at scale that includes domestic workers, as well as all parents working in the informal sector who naturally sit outside of social protection schemes and employer-supported childcare, which are often two mechanisms for providing childcare in countries, but do not cover these most vulnerable workers. Lots of provision right now is being provided by the non-state sector, and I say non-state sector specifically, based on the conversation we just had. And we think this will continue to be a really important player in the space, but it is very unlikely that providers are going to be able to get a low enough price point that all families can be able to afford this childcare, and that it can also achieve a decent level of quality. So to reach the most vulnerable families, government engagement is going to be crucial, and that might be through publicly provided childcare that at least targets the most vulnerable of the population, including those working in the informal sector, or through governments providing support to the non-state sector to be able to reduce the price and improve quality. So for example, subsidies, as was mentioned, and Colombia is a good example of a country that provides subsidies to home-based childcare providers, serving the most vulnerable families in order to promote women's employment. The services are funded through a mix of public financing as well as some low parental fees, but there is at least a cap on parental fees. And I think the other part of this is kind of subsidies of the non-state sector or publicly provided childcare is sort of one option at scale to reach the most informal workers. But I think we also need to look specifically at what the needs are for these informal workers, and then be able to tailor childcare solutions accordingly. And WeGo and ILO have done some really great work around this. But this is certainly a priority topic for us, and we'll be working with those organizations to develop guidance for country teams around this specifically. And then the fun thing I just want to mention here is around, obviously, the workforce development for the whole childcare workforce, including domestic workers. And for us, it's really important that governments thinking about how to build this capacity, but also recognizing the work of these caregivers and ensuring appropriate remuneration and professionalization. As you all know, these are some of the most vulnerable, underpaid and undervalued workers in society and performing such an important job. So that will also be an important part of our program.
Thank you. There is so much to pick up on, and I actually realize we're coming to the last few minutes of the hour that we have together. So I will encourage you all to do what we've been doing throughout this event, and that is providing links and resources that we can share out with the participants so they can continue to learn from the research and evidence gathering and applied work that you all have been doing in this sector. And I know there are more questions. Apologies to the audience that we won't have time to get to everything. And Jamila, I'm going to turn it back to you. And there has been a question that has come up repeatedly, which I'm excited to see. And that is, what do we need to do? What are we investing in? And I think this is a question for us at AID. What are we investing in, and how do we pivot toward bringing those investments to scale? So if you want to touch on that, Jamila, be my guest. I think we certainly want everyone's input on that question as we move forward. Thank you all so much. Such a great conversation.
Truly, thank you to everyone who's joined, to our panelists, to our audience. It is so valuable to get this conversation going, and we look forward to many more of them as we continue to explore together what we can do to really address the gaps that exist in the care economy. On the question of how we are doing that together, one piece to note is that there is, with the spotlight that the pandemic has shown on this gap, there is a real opportunity right now and real momentum among bilateral governments, foundations, multilateral institutions, corporations, civil society to really come together and direct new resources and to co-finance and to partner and to really look at how can we draw from the lessons that exist and really put those into practice and scale them up. So I know, for example, that Germany is hosting the G7 this year. This is one of the priority topics in the Gender Equality Working Group that will be put on the Foreign Minister and Development Minister track and up to heads of state to together be speaking about the care economy. The US government has directed resources to this, including through our Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund, which is focused on women's economic security. And we see investing in the care economy as one of the priorities there. So the intent right now is to, now that we've got the political and financial commitments, to identify and lift up where the research is, where are the proven models, where are the best practices, how can we work together to continue to expand the research and test interventions, and where we're doing this together with bilateral governments and with the private sector. And as we heard, there's lots of different models of policies and interventions and work that can be done. So the intent now is really to identify both what we at USAID, together with other partners in the US government and with our partners around the world, what we can do together to invest more in this space. So know that the intent is to go from this conversation truly into action, to link, as I said, the political financial commitments with now action on the ground. So really thrilled. We've got all of you joining us in this conversation and in the important work that we have ahead. So ever onwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jamila, Bama, to all of our panelists, and thanks to all of you for joining us today for this webinar. Clearly, we could have had a whole other hour, so we just enjoyed the robust discussion. You'll see that a poll, an exit poll, is there if you don't mind participating in that poll. And any other additional comments or messages, please do feel free to enter those in the chat. We have been collecting all of the resources, all the messages that you have been entering in, and we really encourage you to go back to the Market Links website where there are blog posts and hopefully some continued discussion. So thank you again for joining us today, and we wish you a wonderful rest of the day. To exit, just click on the red leave button in the lower right-hand corner. Thank you again so much.